Hello, so for this next series of videos, we're going to talk about subroutines. Subroutines are a little bit different monster than the functions we had been dealing with earlier. And let me just put these guys side by side to compare them for a second. So functions, if you remember, and there's a couple different forms. You can write a function in Visual Basic. You can use pre-made functions in Excel. Math gives you equations that have functions in them. And the idea behind a function is you're going to have something like sine, cosine, radians, sum, and inside of that, you're going to pass it information, like you're going to take the sine of 30 degrees, or you're going to take the square root of x. So you're going to have to give it some information, and after the function executes, it's going to output a number. So if I type in equals sine radians 30 and hit enter, it will output a number onto my Excel sheet. Or in math, if I put in some value for x, it's going to crank x through that equation, and the function, there's going to be a number that's attached to that thing. So in the programming language, you'll see that the function has a name like square root or sine or cosine. It has parentheses with a variable that it's going to send in to do some calculation with. And we have this other declaration here where we're actually telling the program what kind of output we're going to get out of this function. So are we going to output a number or a string, boolean? What kind of output is coming out of the function? So functions have an input, a name, an output, and some kind of a calculation inside that it's going to do in there. If we compare that to what's happening within the subroutine, we can send it an input if you want to, but you don't have to. So this is an example where we're actually not providing any information to the subroutine. So these parentheses here don't have anything in them. We also don't have any as double or defined variables out here because the subroutine does not have an output. So of course it's calculating something, and within the routine, within the code, I'm going to have a message box that's going to output something that it does. But right here, this very first line, this is where the big difference, you can see it between subroutines and functions. So I don't have an output, I don't have to have an input, and within the code itself, this is where it's going to be gathering information within the code, it's going to be exporting things within the code, and it's not going to be happening as part of kind of the name of it and the statement of it. Okay, so subroutines versus functions, and we'll go ahead and start with a subroutine. Another couple of notes on here. So it is good programming etiquette to include comments in your code saying what the program is doing. So comments are in green for Excel. They start with this little apostrophe at the beginning of it. In Excel, there's actually nothing at the end of the line of code. When we get into C++, we'll have semicolons and some slightly different syntax there. Usually you start the subroutine, you give that subroutine a name, and you may or may not provide information that's going to be fed into the subroutine there. You'll have some comments explaining to the user what the subroutine is going to be trying to do and what maybe each line is going to be doing. So right here we have declaring whatever variables we have in this code, and if that variable is a number, so in this case the variable is named answer, and you can call these anything you want. Start with a letter, don't use strange characters in it. You can have numbers, they just can't be the first character in it. So here we're declaring that the variable answer is going to be a string. So here we have an input box. What is your name? It's going to pop up and ask the user what their name is, and a little if statement that if they don't put anything in, then we're going to ask them again, you didn't enter a name, please, tell me what your name is. And so we go back and forth with the user a little bit until we get the information that we need. Okay, so they put in some kind of a name, and that is going to be attached to this variable answer. So their answer is equal to John Smith or something. So your answer is and answer. So it's going to have a message box that pops up with their answer. And there's the end of our if statement and the end of our subroutine. So this is just an example of a subroutine and how it's set up and some of the things that it might do. So for the homework, we're going to go ahead and create a very simple subroutine. For the video, instead of doing the square root of x, I'm going to do the square root of 5 minus x. So just a slightly different equation in here. But for the homework, just keep it very simple, do the square root of x. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open up Excel here. And I'm going to, the very first thing you should always do, of course, is to save your work. So I'll say week number 4, and I'm going to make sure that this is a macro-enabled workbook because otherwise it won't save my code. So there we go, save. And I've got my developer studio over there. Remember, if you don't have your developer studio showing up, you're going to go to File, Options, and this is a tool in your ribbon. So kind of check around to see, like these drawing tools, those are really nice if you don't have those popped up either. But here's your developer code. Okay, so we've got a developer and we're going to go head over to Visual Basic. Now I have this set up so that I have my locals window over here, and then I also have my properties window and my project window. If your screen does not look like my screen, you can get to all these windows by going to View, and there's your locals. You just click on it and your locals will pop up, your Project Explorer and your properties. So these are the windows we'll use this time around. I don't have anywhere to write my code yet, so I need to insert a module. You can either insert modules up here, or I'm going to actually make sure that my module is attached to the right file. If you have multiple Excel files open at the same time, sometimes that can get a little bit confusing of who that module is assigned to and moving into the right spot. So if you just get in the habit of kind of right-clicking on your file and putting the module in the right place, that'll be a good start for you. So here's your module. Oh, option explicit. This is something that I did earlier. So if you go up here to Tools and Options, you have this little option to require variable declaration. And checking this little box right here is going to just make debugging a little bit easier. So it will come up with red error messages anytime you type in one of your variables wrong. So capital letter versus lowercase letter, or some little detail you didn't quite get right, it's going to warn you right away and just make the whole programming experience run smoother and faster if you go ahead and start with this explicit option. Okay, and that one, if you don't have that up yet, you might have to like restart Excel, and then the next time it'll automatically start popping up. So there's a few little customizations that you can do for your workspace. Okay, so here we go. Not a function. This time we're going to start with a subroutine, so just capital SUB. And the next time we're going to put our name. So maybe we'll do, this is a square root of 5 minus x. And I'm going to do quite a few different versions of this and create new modules for each new version of the code. And that's how I want you to turn your homework into. So hopefully by the end, your homework will have a whole bunch of different modules. I'll call this module X1. Okay, so I don't actually need to put variables in there. I have parentheses with nothing in them. And for this subroutine, notice it ends the sub as soon as I hit enter. I'm going to, let's see, declare my variables, dimension X, capital AX, double, and I'll also declare Y as double. So we'll just have a few numbers in here to start out with. And there's a couple of different ways that you can feed it information. We'll use the input box and message box for a couple of these modules, and then we'll go to actually grabbing information from cells within the Excel sheet. So, but to start out with, let's go ahead and grab information from an input box. So this is going to pop a box up on the screen, and we're going to send it a string. If you have like a bunch of text you're sending to something, usually you put that in quotes. So we're going to say enter a number, and if we're going to do the square root of 5 minus x, then we have to have something that's less than 5. So this is a little bit different than your homework, but if we have a number less than 5, then we should be able to do this calculation. So y is going to equal 5 minus x to the 0.5. So that will only work if x is less than 5. You can't take the square root of a negative number. And then let's see, after we do our calculation, it's probably good to write that out somewhere. So we'll do a message box. So input box actually gets information. Message box is purely just a message. So we'll say the square root of 5 minus your number is, okay, so that's what's going to go in there, and we have to add in then what we calculated. So we have two things going out of the message box. We have this chunk of text, and then we're going to have that number that we just calculated in here. One thing that's kind of nice to do when you're coding is tab a few things over. So maybe you want to have, we'll do this some more with when we have like if statements too. So just to keep track of like paragraphs or chunk of code, use spacing to do this. And then of course, it's always good etiquette to start your code off with a comment line. So I'm going to put in a little apostrophe and say, this program calculates the square root of 5 minus x. Okay, and if I hit enter, you'll see our comment line automatically turned green. We've got blue for the subroutines and blue as double. If I didn't type that as a capital letter or something, you see that? It's actually correcting it for me. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. There's a couple different ways we can run it. We can just hit the run button right here. We can go over to our worksheet and hit Alt F8, and that will bring up all of the macros. That would be the same thing as if we went to Developer and then clicked on macros over here and hit run. So a couple different ways to try out that subroutine. So here we go. Enter a number less than 5. Let's try out 1. So here we go. The square root of 5 minus your number is 2. 5 minus 1 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2. That sounds good. Okay, so we have a running subroutine, and hopefully that made sense. So that's stored here under module 2, module 1. I can exit out of it, and it's right there if I click on this guy in my project window. I can also rename this module. So maybe I'll just say, this is my square root. You don't want to give it the exact same name as your subroutine because that can sometimes get a little bit confusing. Square root of 5 minus 1. So I'm giving it some kind of descriptive name so that when I have a whole bunch of modules going on, I won't be able to tell apart what's doing what in there.